Wishing to comment this evening were required to properly register prior to the designated start time of tonight's meeting by completing the information specified in the public comment registration card. When called to the podium, each commenter will begin by stating their first and last name and municipality. Each statement will be made by a commenter will be limited to 3 minutes. Individuals will be notified by the time clock when their time allotted for public comment has expired. All commentary should be directed to the board as a whole. Public comments may be interrupted or terminated if the commentary exceeds 3 minutes or if the commentary is obscene and or threatening in nature. The speaker this evening is Judy DeFonso.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the good weather. Judy DeFonso here, still living in all places, East Goshen Township. I'm going to start at the bottom of my list and work my way up today for a change. I see this question all the time on social media about the school district tracks. Is the public allowed to use the tracks? I know it's more of a question than a comment, but I see it so often, there's no track needed, teams are using it, can the public use it? My other comment is on policy 104 AG3, which has the title of Title IX Sexual Harassment Procedures and Grievance Process for Formal Complaints. I feel that title is too short. I think that we need to add the word staff because it seems all of 104 applies to staff, and just to kind of prevent confusion. The other AGs that were retiring had the word staff in it, and I just feel that, that clarification would be a good thing to have on that policy. Lastly, policy 103. I noticed that the information on filing a complaint with OCR was deleted in the remix of the policy. I know that things were kind of combined and changed around. I realized that the Office of Civil Rights in Philadelphia has been closed, so we don't have a local office anymore, and it looks like it's actually the U.S. Department of Education that now deals with civil rights complaints in an educational setting. I'm just, I guess it's a question, comment kind of thing. Why is there no longer mention that, if things aren't resolved at the district level, that there is a higher authority that can be gone to? I'm assuming that's still available. Let's just say with all the changes out there, it's kind of hard to keep track of what's going on. But right now, the way the policy stands, it looks like everything has to be resolved within the district. And I know that there are times when you kind of need to go to a higher authority. And I believe the place to go right now is Office of Civil Rights, that's within the Department of Education. So I just wanted to kind of make that comment. And that's all for right now. Thank you.
All right, that takes us to approval of our meeting minutes from last month. I'm looking for approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's 4 ayes. And tonight we will begin our meeting with a review of policies and administrative guidelines from policy 103 through 104.1. We will then finish up the time-sensitive policies and policies that require annual review prior to the new school year. And Dr. Christopher will walk us through the list. Dr. Christopher.
Yes, unfortunately, it is the Dr. Christopher show this evening. So, we spent quite a bit of time, I should say, we really, Amanda and Linda and I spent a lot of time looking at really trying to address some of the fairly rapid changes that have happened with Title IX and trying to think through how we can ensure that, our policies are aligned with, current Title IX guidance and things that are no longer aligned and we're moving out of these policies or retiring. In addition, trying to make sure that we are, ensuring that, discrimination for things that are no longer considered Title IX are still addressed. and other policies. So that's really the bulk of what we're doing here tonight. So the first one we have up is 103, discrimination harassment affecting students. And so that is formally discrimination based on sex, Title IX, students, and staff. So this policy was essentially struck in its entirety and rewritten. I think would make any sense. Is there anything you want to add to that, Amanda?
No, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, I think also the important thing to note is in some ways we are moving back to, at least from a number of policy standpoints. As you might recall, we adopted all the policies regarding the 2024 regulations. Now the 2024 regulations are void. And so now we're directed back to the 2021. So some of these policies, when you look at them, will look familiar because they look more like the policies that existed previously, where instead of having multiple separate policies, we now have kind of one policy with items underneath them, and you get put on your path depending on how, you know, what the alleged offense, you know, what category it puts you into. So I think that is kind of, just to put things kind of in context, we're almost taking a step back in time to where we were before we were last summer. So,
And, you know, we are not taking protections away from any group, we are just addressing them in a way that's consistent with state and federal guidelines.
Yep, correct.
Any questions about policy 103?
I do. And I know this is part of the whole Title IX discussion, the old policy and the new policy. In the past, we had included, as a district, we decided to include harassment based on misgendering someone. Where is that individual now protected in our policies? Someone who is intentionally misgendered, or somebody who's discriminated against based on their gender identity?
so I think what we talked about last summer was we kind of have buckets under these policies. And so someone who is transgender, under the 2024 regulations, that would have been addressed under Title IX, because under those regulations, that was the path. Now that the 2024 regulations are void, we go now look to the bucket of what I would call protected class discrimination, so everything that isn't Title IX. And under those buckets, I believe the federal position right now would be at least as to students. Staff is different title. But as to students, federal law wouldn't apply. But under our state law, sex discrimination encompasses gender identity under that. So we would process it under, I guess it would be under that, it would be under policy 103, I think it would be AG2, 103 AG2, it would go under protected class discrimination, and that's where it would process. Now, if at some point in the future that the state law changes, then the goal is always to have all students, regardless of what their needs are, to not be discriminated, harassed, bullied, to be able to attend school and obtain their education. So then those concerns after that would then be processed under bullying if that came into place, which is not the case currently.
Thank you.
So as a follow-up to that, Amanda, you mentioned, you know, what the federal law guidelines are versus state.
Mm-hmm.
So where in this policy does it sort of indicate that cascade, right? Because there's a lot of language around following federal guidelines. So where's the state jurisdiction in this policy?
Well, and a lot of that's in the legal references at the end, you know, to point to it. What would happen is if somebody files a complaint, because often a regular person doesn't always know what bucket they fall into, because why would you? You know, so what the process is set up and why there's one policy for students now instead of multiple policies, they don't have to make that determination at the outset. They would make their complaint and then what's supposed to happen is the building principal would notify the Title IX coordinator. And all complaints go to the Title IX coordinator. and then the Title IX coordinator makes a determination of what bucket this falls into. And if they need assistance in doing so, from a legal standpoint, they'll get that assistance. Now, if somebody disagrees with, they think, oh, well, I should have been Title IX instead of just protected class, there is a process to appeal the Title IX, that initial determination of what bucket you go into. But that's the goal, is that it's going to one person who will then parse it out under where it goes. And that's the recommended path, that the goal is for it to go to the Title IX coordinator, so it makes it more likely that the allegation ends up under the right path.
So if like Title IX went away tomorrow, those state designations for protected class would still be in place?
Correct.
And the reason things go through the Title IX officer is simply because they're the person who is most likely to either know the answer or to know how to get it from
Correct.
another authority.
And there's two trained individuals, and we have a Title IX coordinator who it starts with, and then if the Title IX coordinator looks at it and says, this is not me, then they may pass it. If it's other protected class discrimination, they think it might be that, they'll hand it to the compliance officer, is where it goes next. Or if they look at it and they say, this is a problem, but this is not based on Title IX or any protected class, then it goes back to the building principal in the context of, it would be addressed as bullying or whatever other district policy that might be implicated. And just to be clear, at any point along the way, if there's a criminal offense or there's child abuse, that's a stop no matter where you are, to get that referral out.
Any other questions?
And I just wanted to answer Ms. DeMonzo's question. Under authority, it does talk about where you can direct your inquiries. You can do it to the Title IX coordinator or the Office of Civil Rights or both. And then at the end of the policy, it does state that there is a right to alternative complaint policies that, under federal or state law, and that which has always been the case. One would hope you would start with the district, but you don't have to.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we can move to a vote on policy 103. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any nays? It's 4 ayes, and that takes us then on to 103 AG2.
Yes, so 103 AG2, we have revisions again to meet applicable law. Once again, trying to ensure that we're in compliance with federal Title IX.
Any questions about this AG? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? It's 4 ayes. And then we have a bunch of policies that we're retiring.
Right, so these are the policies that really were for 2024 Title IX regulations, which are no longer valid.
That's a fair summary for that, yeah.
Are there any? I have a question, which is, do we need to discuss and vote on each of these individually?
You could offer them as a slate if you wanted to. But if people have different opinions on different ones, then
Just ask if there's any comments.
Are there any comments on any of these?
All the way to.
103.2 to 103.3 AG3. If not, we can vote then on these on the slate. 103.
No, I'm fine.
What?
Okay, we're
No,
good.
I'm fine with it. You
Okay.
just double checking.
Okay, thank you. We're voting on retiring 103.2, 103.2 AG1, 103.2 AG2, 103.3, 103.3 AG1, 103.3 AG2, and 103.3 AG3. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? All right, that takes us to revised policy 104.
Right, so revised policy 104, discrimination, harassment affecting staff. Once again, this policy has been fairly rewritten, mostly struck and rewritten at this point. To once again meet those same criteria. And so once again, now we're talking about staff.
Yeah, and it's generally a step back to the 2020 policy, and it's similar but not identical to the student one, just because there's certain, like genetic identity is protected for employees but doesn't fall for students. You know, there's some little picky things like that.
Are there any questions about revised policy 104? If not, we can move to a vote on that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? That's 4 ayes, and then we have a new AG, 104 AG3.
Yeah, and I'm gonna let you talk about that a little bit. But that one specifically, I mean, it just matches the new things on the, but I wanna make sure that's accurate.
Yeah, again, this is, it's the Title IX procedures for staff, and the reason it shows up as a new policy was because it was a separate policy, a new AG because it was a separate policy under the old regs. The procedures also here are they're very similar to the student ones because they're statutory and regulatory, what those procedures are. Really the only difference between probably the student and the staff policy is there's a little more detail in here about like removal from work, whereas on the student policy there's about more detail about like an emergency exclusion because they're different people with the focus of the policy. But otherwise it's generally the same. It's the regulatory requirements on how you're supposed to follow the process.
Any questions about page 104 AG3?
Yes, that's correct. That is correct. The title.
Should we address the title?
I agree.
You could, yeah, we can put that. My recommendation would be, and I think it's down in the informational items, that if we do that for 104 AG3, which is Title IX, we also do it for 104 AG2 as an informational item, since they're both staff.
Consistency.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable. Let's take those two policies and we'll make their titles consistent and have them include staff so it's obvious what they're about.
That's not a problem.
If we're making that change, do we need to just vote with revisions or do we need to bump it to another?
For 11, you could just say to make that revision.
Okay,
Yep.
so in that case, are there any other questions? Then I'm going to move that we vote on 104 AG3 with the revised title. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? That's 4 ayes, and then we have a slate of policies that we are retiring.
And once again, I recommend you just take those as a group. Those are questions.
Any questions about that? That's 104.1, 104.1 AG1, 104.1 AG2, and 104.1 AG3. If there are no questions, I'm going to move to a vote on retiring those 4 policies. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? All right, that then takes us to policy 216.
So policy 216, student records, we should have minor revisions to that policy. You'll remember that we've reviewed these recently. That was last reviewed in May, so we just had a small change.
Any questions about policy 216?
I have a question in reading this. In terms of the one provision that we're blocking, number 8, what was just some background in terms of why?
The reason that was struck is when we went through and reviewed it, we realized that it was duplicative of the item before it, after it. where it's the same language but without the A and B, and so it's just, it's something that should have been struck back in May, but wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not removing anybody's rights or anything like that.
No, it's just, it's an error, actually.
Yeah.
It's literally the same words
Yeah.
twice.
Thanks.
Any other questions about policy 216? All right, in that case, we'll move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? That's 4 ayes, and then we are on 218.2.
Once again, this is just, we actually missed someone's name. We're the public safety manager instead of supervisor.
Any questions about that policy?
Said the wrong title.
If there are no questions, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? It's 4 ayes, and then we're at policy 234.
And you're gonna see some changes in this policy really related to state law and changes in the law. So we just have our definitions are updated, they look different. And then specifically, actions the district is taking.
Any questions about that policy?
Doing this.
I just want to add, some of the things that have changed in here are because they were in here because of the 2024 Title IX regulations, where it requires the public hearing to go to the Title IX coordinator if they needed a reasonable accommodation. Now we're just moving it back to your prior process where they would go see the 504 coordinator to see what a reasonable accommodation they might need would be.
And that because of changes in federal policy.
Correct.
Any other questions about policy 234? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? It's 4 ayes, and then we're at 317.
So 317, we've added some due process information in here, really specific to requesting a hearing for employees who are, under suspicion of conduct. And that's just to ensure that we meet applicable law.
Thank you. Any questions about policy 317? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? That's 4 ayes, and then we're at 317.1.
317.1, we just have two small changes, which once again are related to federal law change.
Any questions about policy 317.1? No? We can take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? 4 ayes, and then we're at policy 320.
Policy 320, we've outlined very specifically individuals' rights, even though they're employees of the school district, but their freedom of speech rights are, just to try and ensure that we're keeping up with the most applicable, I think, case law and things at this point.
Any questions about policy 320? If not, we can go to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? 4 ayes. And then we are on policy 702.
Policy 702 is a very minor change. We should just change the title.
Any questions about policy 702? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? And that takes us to policy 706.1.
Same thing. Yep, just change the same title.
Any questions about that? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? No nays. And then we are at policy 707.
So 707 needs reapproved by the committee, and then we first reapprove it again. So we have a regular one that we do with this one. Can you speak to that at all?
I know this policy visited you last month. When it's back again, because when we went to get it into better form to upload, we realized there was a critical not missing on one of the sections.
See the yellow,
And, yeah, and that's substantive, so it had to come back to you.
Okay. So there was essentially a typo, but a typo that changed the
Yeah.
meaning.
And all the red and green we saw
We seen
black, yeah,
We
okay.
seen
It's last time,
I
it
wasn't
just,
sure.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just highlighted.
And then there's, no online reservation system, I guess, was,
Page 4.
yeah.
Yeah,
Any other?
yeah, well, there was a not, it was group 3B, there was a not, and then the online you're right, the 2 online reservations.
Any other questions? Any questions about policy 707? If not, we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? All right, that takes us to our informational items.
Yeah, all of these are just AGs that would track with the policies that we worked on tonight. So they're just updated.
Thank you. Any questions about those informational items? And then I will note that there were 2 policies and guidelines that were reviewed with no changes, policy 104 AG4 and policy 216 AG1. There is 1 administrative guideline under further review, policy 235.1 AG1. And finally, there's a list of policies and administrative guidelines that will be in second reading and approved at this month's board meeting. I will not read those because it's long, but you can find it online. And that then takes us to an announcement that our next committee meeting will be held on Monday, August 18th, 2025, and should adjourn our meeting for tonight.
So we run a meeting.
We get started with tonight's Property and Finance Committee meeting. The first item is roll call as we normally do. Director Parkinson.
Here.
Director Christie. Here. Director Walmsley.
Here.
Okay, Justin, we're all here. Any public comment tonight, Justin? Okay, no public comments, we'll proceed. The next thing we have is our last meeting was on April 22nd. Nobody approached me with any comments, so approval of the April 22nd Property and Finance Committee meetings. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right, we're good with that. Continuing on, as we do monthly, Mr. Scully is going to review the May budget forecast model with updates from prior month.
Thanks, Gary. Yes, I am going to review the budget forecast model, which will then lead into 4 motions for our approval of a final budget. We are slated to approve the final budget next Wednesday night at our regular scheduled board meeting. So in review of the budget forecast model, if we look at page 3, which are changes that we have made to the 24-25 projection. So that's projection changes for the current year. We have reduced our salaries in both administrative salaries and custodial salaries by $205,000 combined. You'll see a decrease in educational supplies, although that shows up as a decrease of $319,000. That's the PPA carryover. So that you'll see that the reverse of that is an increase in expenditures in 25-26. We allow our schools to carry over for big ticket items. This number is, I do want to advise the board, this number is higher than it normally has been. I will tell you, both of our elementary schools that are under renovations asked for permission to not order their supplies. Normally what we do is we order our supplies at the end of the year and then stock them for the summer. With them being in a transition phase and with climate and things like that, they really didn't want to order a lot of their supplies. So they've actually asked to carry the money over. They will order their supplies in July. We'll still have them here on the time frame for August. I thought that was a good idea, especially with that. Mary City House not even having air conditioning. I don't want to. We want to have paper and things like that stored in areas where we're not sure where they'll be. It just tends to destroy the paper. So there's big carryovers there. Henderson High School also had a large carryover. Then we have a reduction in debt service. So that is a true reduction in our debt service. I had an assumption in the forecast model for our new borrowing. So for a $30 million borrowing, I had an assumption in there at an interest rate. The interest rate obviously came in lower. We talked about that last month. That has netted us a savings in expense for the current year of $462. I'm sorry, that is a refinance. I apologize. This is on the refinance. We had $462,000 savings in the refinance. So that was the refinancing of the 2014 AA series. We refinanced them as well as borrowed $30 million of new money. So this is actually the refinancing savings in accordance with our board policy. Whenever we have a refinancing, we recognize the savings, we transfer that money into the capital reserve to offset future capital expenditures. So you'll see that I reduced expenditures by $462,000, but then I increased it to transfer the other funds for $456,000. The delta between them is a loss of revenues because that bond was a Plan-Com reimbursable bond. So we will lose a little bit of reimbursement. You'll see that in the revenue line items, it's $5,937 that we reduce in revenues because it is a Plan-Com eligible bond. The other change that we made, everybody okay with the expenditures? And okay. The other change we made in 24-25 is we recognized additional revenues for current real estate taxes for $400,000. They are actual receipts. That is revenue that we did receive over and above what we had anticipated and what we had budgeted for. So the net of that is a almost $925,000 savings, or what I used it for was to reduce the millage impact for the 25-26 school year. Then jumping over into the 25-26 changes, so that's page 6 of the forecast model, you'll see that $319,000 is an increase in expense. Again, that is there was a negative $319 on the previous page. This is the increase. This is actually an increase in budget for next year. $524,000, I already alluded to that in the wrong page. That $524,000 is actual savings on the new debt borrowing of $30 million. So we had an assumption in the forecast model. Our assumption came in at a lower interest rate than we had assumed. We always take that as a recognized savings to millage. We do not transfer that to the capital reserve because we haven't budgeted, well, because we haven't done that budget yet for the year. So I am reducing our expense for the 25-26 year by $524,000. And then you'll see that delta of $7,000, that also is the Plan-Com reimbursements and the difference between what we had assumed and what our numbers were. So that actually is a $212,000 also savings to 25-26. So with all of that in mind, we have millage or recommended millage for our budget for next year at 2.9% in both Delaware County and Chester County. Obviously, if you take that out longer, one's 2.83, the other one's 2.94, but on an average, it's 2.9 in both counties, which is much more favorable for Delaware County residents than last year was, as everyone from Delaware County will remember. So that is where we are with our forecast model, which will then lead into my next presentation's on our budget. So as it stands right now, jumping to our next budget line items, we are looking for approval of a budget at 2.9% tax increase in both counties of Delaware and Chester.
John, just to reinforce one key point, I think positive point, was the savings of $1 million, both on the bond refinancing and the new bond borrowing.
Correct.
I think those two numbers together are basically around $1 million. That was substantial, so I think that's all positive that you stated last month and again this month.
All positive. I think I did inform the board this month that we
We
did a
did.
Moody's rating, and Moody's was AAA, and they did commend the board on their management of fund balances and not utilizing reserves to balance budgets and willingness to take tax increases as needed. So that was all in their press release.
And John, AAA, is that the highest, that's the highest
It's
rating?
the highest, yes. And I actually did not check, but I believe we still remain one of 8 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania with a AAA.
Thank you.
And that's positive, as John stated, because our bond borrowing gets impacted by the rating, the Moody's rating. So I think that's positive, and looking at the 2.9% both for Delaware and Chester County puts us in a good spot, and we're well below the Act 1 limit, which is good news.
Correct. So the Act 1 limit in both Delaware County and Chester County was 4%, and we're at 2.9.
Correct.
So it is well below the Act 1 index.
Any questions on the budget forecast model before we move forward? Because that's what's going to be presented to us next Wednesday going forward.
I don't have any questions, but I do appreciate the due diligence and the reduction in the savings where you were able to garner.
Appreciate it.
All right, going forward, the next thing we have the property tax exclusion amount calculations.
So I do have some, if I could, Mary, I do have a few of the slides that I put together, that if it's okay to look through property and finance, just because I think that they're actually good talking points, at least for the committee members and the board. So for the expense summary, just can you jump to, where do you have that on your thing? It should be still right on that forecast model, and it should be following it. So these are the same, just updated, same spreadsheets that you saw last month. I did have a bigger PowerPoint last month. Not much has changed since last month, so I did not do another PowerPoint. But if you look at our expenses, the difference between 24, 25, 25, 26, it's $11 million increase in expenditures. 6.9 million of it is staffing, and when I say staffing, that's staffing and all related benefits associated with staffing. So our increase in expenditures is 3.51% year over year. Again, well below the 4.0% tax millage increase or Act 1 increase. I should say millage increase, Act 1 increase. When we look at revenues, our revenues, which on the next page, our revenue increase is 2.4% without a tax increase. So all other areas that we've looked at would net us a 2.4% increase in revenues, and then the delta between those is what the tax increase is going to give us. I do want to caution the board, and caution is a bad word. I do want to advise the board, I guess is a better word. I did not do anything with federal revenues or state revenues. So I assumed level budgets for revenues for state and local. I'm sorry, state and federal federal revenues. I think we will be okay with our federal revenues. If we lose federal revenues for next year, I don't believe we need to have programmatic cuts for the 25-26 school year, but we would have to use fund balance to balance our budget. So I have no other assumption to go with than the assumptions that we have right now, and I've left everything at a level funding for both the state level and the federal level.
I think that's the appropriate thing to proceed with, unless anybody disagrees. That's the best we can do at this point.
But we have healthy enough reserves. I don't think that that is a good measure, and I don't think that's something that we want to do for future years, but for the current year, I think that that is our best approach for the 25-26 school year. I put the update in for the 10-year history of mandates. Again, I explained that last month. Over the 10-year period of 13-14 through 23-24, we've had an increase in our expenditures of about $81 million. Of that $81 million, 42 million of it is mandated expenditures. When I say mandated expenditures, that's our PSERS expense, our charter school expense, our special ed expenditures, and our transportation costs. That 42 million is offset by $18 million increase in state revenues. So though the state is supposed to be funding us for those mandated expenses, you can see that they're not funding us in full. So the local share of mandated costs, and the local share of those mandated $42 million hours that the taxpayer has absorbed over that 10-year period. I have a slide with the assessed value analysis. It's the same slide that you saw last month, and you'll see the step valuation between the two counties. Then the last thing that I would like to point out is just the history of tax increases. A little bit hard to see on screen, but for those of you that are looking at it on your computer, the highlight column that says Act 1 index, you'll see the 3-year Act 1 index is 4.5%, the 5-year is 4%, and the 10-year average is 3.2%. If you jump over the next column, you look at our Chester County tax increases, our 3-year average is 1.4, 5-year is 1.5, and 10-year is 1.8. So our Chester County increases over a 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year are well below what the Act 1 limits or what Act 1 would allow us to raise. I would like to be able to say the same thing for Delaware County, but unfortunately last year really hurt us with Delaware County. So on a 3-year, we are slightly above the Act 1 index. For a 5-year, we are below the Act 1 index. And for a 10-year, we're just about the same as an Act 1 index. But Delaware County did hurt us last year with this type of analysis.
And John, this chart is great for the board to have as a reference if anybody asks questions. And also tonight we got the fact book got distributed.
Correct.
This chart, are we always a year behind in the fact book, or is this one in there?
That is not in there.
It's the year prior, that's what I thought. But it's still good reference even for the limits in the fact book or this, because I think it helps explain the situation and the good status of our school district.
So this is an update to the back book.
That's correct. This is 1 year later.
So then the next slide I have in there is a comparison of our millage rates. When I did review it with Gary last week, it was a little confusing, so let me explain. I'm going to start in Chester County. You'll see the first column, the first line in Chester County says Westchester area 25-26. That is our proposed millage for the 25-26 year. What I'm trying to point out here is our comparison of our 24-25 and 25-26 millage rates to everyone else in Chester County's millage rates for 24-25. I don't know what anyone's millage rates are going to be for 25-26. But if I look at our 25-26 proposed millage rate of 23.3845, it is still lower than any other school district's approved 24-25 millage rate. Same thing holds true for Delaware County. So we do hold that we are still the lowest taxing entity in both Delaware County and Chester County. The Westchester Area School District is the lowest of the taxing authorities for those school districts.
So you do look, John, this is a telling story here. When you look at it substantial, when you look at some of these numbers on the districts are, it's a substantial difference across the board, but it's a good way to show where we are at this point. So thank you for sharing both counties.
Correct. So that basically is all informational, which then leads to the following 3 items that we do need to get approval for, Gary.
I think the first was the informational on the homestead exclusion resolution, right? That was the update on that. Number 2.
That is correct, which I did not do yet. So
Yes.
there's update on the Act 1 homestead farmstead. Sorry about that. So there is an update to the property. Everyone's aware of the Act 1 went into Act 2006, and part of the whole legislation was that gaming revenues that are earned in the state of Pennsylvania would be used as tax credits to offset all school districts' school tax bills. The school board does need to accept the property tax allocation in order to use that as a rebate on our tax bills. So that is why I put this as our first motion on there, because if the board does not approve this, my budget doesn't balance and I have to go back to the starting point. But there is a budget resolution that is attached for your authorization for homestead farmstead exclusion. I will say that this is the largest amount that we have seen since the implementation of Act 1. So it's $1.025 billion in state-funded local tax relief was available for gambling and gaming revenues in the state of Pennsylvania for this year. That is the highest that we have seen by far. I think last year was $983 million. The Westchester Area School District allocation is $6.1 million, and that will amount to a homestead farmstead exclusion for all eligible parcels in Delaware County and Chester County of $248.71. So that is informational, but then there is a resolution that's attached that I am going to need an approval for. Anybody have questions on that? It's been the same since 2006. The number's just growing, which is good. Every little bit that we can help taxpayers with any type of decreasing tax burden, I think is a good thing.
Now we'll move on to the final budget resolution.
Correct. So then I have a approval of the, well, I do have the approval of the homestead farmstead that I do need
Yes.
approved.
That's fine.
So although Gary, item number 2 does say that it is an update on the Act 1, it is actually a resolution that does need approval.
It does say approval later on in the text, I do see it. Okay.
I don't want to read the entire thing,
No.
because that's gonna start my coughing for sure.
No, we'll handle that as well.
But it is $6.1 million that the board is recognizing. We'll be using that $6.1 million to offset the tax burden on all of our residential properties. So they are only people that actually have applied for the homestead farmstead. Not everyone who owns a property in Westchester Area School District is eligible for it, nor do some of them apply for it. If you have a dual residence, especially in Florida, most people choose the Florida homestead. You can only have a homestead farmstead on one property. So most people that own properties in Florida will take the homestead in Florida because it's a much higher calculation than Pennsylvania. Cannot use it on rental properties either, so it has to be the property in which you live. So we had 24,524 properties, and then we had 10 farmsteads for a total of 24,534. When I do all the calculations of the $6.1 million divided by the proposed millages that we have come up with, the homestead farmstead is in in Chester County, it is 10,636, which means we reduce your assessment by 10,636. In Delaware County, same calculations, we reduce your assessment by 21,878. The net result ends up with a $248.71 homestead farmstead exclusion on your tax bills. So the dollar equivalent of actual savings on tax bills is $248.71. I do need approval from the board. It is a budgetary item. We can take it as a roll call through committee, but it needs to go to the board for an actual call.
Yep, so the Property and Finance Committee, just as Mrs. Scully just stated, the approval of the 25-26 homestead farmstead exclusion resolution as stated by Mr. Scully, and he gave us the highlights. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. All right, we're good, and we'll follow up with that in next Wednesday's meeting as a formal roll call. Now the next thing is the number 3 was the final budget
Number
resolution.
3 is the final budget resolution, so I do have included in your packet is the PDE 2028 as well as the required resolutions that go along with the budget. So I do need to have a motion for an approval for the budget in the amount of $333,879,499. That is for the budget for the period of July 1, 2025 through June 30th of 2026. The way Act 1 does these, I don't really care for because I think you should be approving your budget and your millage. So I do want to advise the board that is the dollar amount of the expenditures, $333,879,499, which would equate to millage rates of 23.3845 in Chester County and 11.3681 in Delaware County. Again, the math on both of them is about 2.9%. One is 2.83 and one's 2.93, I believe. But we round up to 2.9%. But I do need to take these 2 separate motions, but I think it's hard to approve an expenditure budget when you don't know what the associated millages. So the expenditure budget on the table for a final budget resolution is for approval for a budget for the 25-26 school year of $333,879,499.
So this item of the final total amount of the budget, the $333 million, is for approval tonight. We'll take that to full board approval next Wednesday. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
No. May I register a comment?
Please do, please do.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I just wanted to clarify why I'm voting nay tonight. So I was asked this question last year why I didn't vote nay coming out of committee, because I voted no at the general board meeting. And interestingly enough, I don't actually normally attend this committee meeting each year because it is usually in a conflict with an event for my children. This year I'm fortunate enough to be here, and I want to explain my nay vote now coming out of committee. Once again, consistent with my prior year's comments, we continue to see a rise in our annual operating expenses. And I know we go through like debt service, retirement, and all of that, but while across PA we see continued annual budget increases of 2 to 5%, we are on the higher side of that, around usually about 4 to 5%. In our recent comprehensive planning sessions, there was actually a member of our community, a parent, who voiced her concerns also about fiscal reviews and our attempts to constrain our rising costs. When I look at our residents, our taxpayers, and I see that, over the course of the last 10 years, a 45% increase in budget. We've seen our tuition expenses increase more than 200% both at the elementary and secondary level. By comparison, personal income has only increased about 26%. And then when you position that against the value proposition that we're offering, and you look at proficiency rates around ELA and math, we've seen a slight drop off with English with respect to our proficiency rates dropping about 17%, but a really concerning trend around math with a more than 34% drop in math proficiency over the course of the last 10 years. There's a really indicating leading indicator there, and it's around 2015. There's a pretty significant drop starting that year, and I know we discussed this when we look at PSSAs and all of that, but at the end of the day, this is a budget about a business, right? And we have to look at what our shareholder return is, and that is in the proficiency of our students. So I think we are hard pressed to continue to ask for 4 to 5% every year and to be levying tax increases when we are still struggling to deliver on our value proposition in terms of student performance. So with that, I will be voting no, or voting nay on this as I just did, and I just wanted to offer those comments for the public so they can understand the position. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the update and the narrative.
Anything, sorry, again, Gary, that needs to move forward to the full board for roll call. Yep.
Each of the items, please.
And then the last item that I have related to the budget is just the annual tax levy resolution, so I did already discuss that. So your real estate taxes in Chester County would be 23.3845. Delaware County would be 11.3681. Both of them represent a 2.9% increase over the current year taxes. Your D transfer would remain 0.5% of 1%. Your earned income tax would remain at 1%. So I do need a resolution, I do need approval of a resolution, which would be for all three of those taxes for the 25-26 school year.
So to the Property and Finance Committee, we're approving those three items for the annual tax levy resolution as Mr. Scully just stated. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. That is all I have for budget for tonight. The other item that I do have is an approval to commit and assign fund balances. I will tell you, this came up last year. This was the first year that we did this last year was the first year we did this in the month of May. This came out of our Auditor General's report when they looked at our fund balance. According to Pennsylvania standards, the school board is supposed to at least acknowledge where they plan to commit or assign fund balances prior to the end of the school year. The problem that we have is, although we know what categories we want to commit or assign fund balances, and it's actually not assignments, it really is just commitments. We take it a step further and do it for both commitments and assignments. The way that the code is written, or school code is written, that commitments are made at the board level, assignments are made at either my level or the superintendent's level. I am not comfortable making assignments for the district's fund balance without the board's acknowledgement of where we are assigning it. So I have combined them both together, so we actually are above what state requirements are. I ask for an approval to the authorization to commit and or assign fund balances. What I don't have are the dollar amounts because it's based on the year-end results. Our audit is never completed until October, November timeframe. So we will come back to you in November, probably in the November timeframe with the dollar amounts, but we are not asking to put money anywhere else other than what we already have. So the administration is requesting approval for the authorization to commit a fund balance for healthcare stabilization and millage rate stabilization. And approval is also requested to assign fund balances for alternative education, property assessment fluctuations, and future staffing needs. So they are the same assignments and commitments that have been on our books for a few years. Most of them have remained stagnant with their dollar amounts. The one that does change, and I expect to change again, would be property assessment fluctuations and or future staffing needs. All right, so again, you're not committing or assigning a dollar amount. You're just stating that if the administration comes forward with dollar amounts for these, you have recognized that we will be assigning or committing fund balances in these categories.
Procedural in nature. So to the Property and Finance Committee, approval for authorization to commit and assign fund balances, as Mr. Scully just stated. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Good there. And then the last thing, RTK update.
Yeah, the last item I have is something that we've been doing for the last few years. I will tell you it's starting to, at least our activities in the right to knows have decreased dramatically over the last couple of years. So right now I have a third quarter of right to knows that I wanted to present to the board. Very, very little. There were 15 requests for a total of $604. As of March 31st, which is the first 9 months of the year, we're at $5,172. I had brought this to the board probably 3 years ago when we were spending upwards of $30,000 a month on our right to know request, and I just thought the board should be aware of the right to know request, what the type of categories are. I'm not looking to call people out, so no, none of this information is actually who the requesters are, which is the types of information that people were looking for. And I had said to the board, I'd like to bring this back quarterly for updates. At a dollar amount of $604, I don't know whether this needs to be an agenda item on a quarterly basis anymore, or we want to take this to a semi-annual or annual, or take it to an annual, and then if I see increases, I come back to the board with updates. It's completely up to the board. We do it anyhow, but.
And I guess to that point, John, my thoughts before was the latter, doing it annually, and if there was any large ones over a certain threshold, to bring those forward. And I want to provide that to the Property Finance Committee and the whole board. If that's satisfactory, or anybody has any other options, feel free to speak up.
No, I concur with that. I mean, if you look at this, there was one substantive request that is almost $4,000 of the expense. So if you excluded that, for the most part, this is pennies. This is actually significantly below probably even what pre-2020 was.
Absolutely.
This is,
yes, this is prioritized.
right, so I would concur with Gary, and maybe we can agree on what an appropriate threshold is, because if it hadn't been for that one, this would be almost a zero budget item.
And this is done on a monthly basis, so I always have the information available. I just didn't know whether it was worth bringing back to the committee on a quarterly basis.
I am curious though, I mean, is the significant reduction, I mean, I know there's a drop in volume, but are we asking for less legal reviews on these also? I mean, is there another reason why the cost in general has gone down?
It's a combination of both. So a lot of the information that was requested in previous years had a lot of student data in it. It's very expensive because we have to redact all the information. So a lot of the stuff was in services and things like that.
Which is why that one was significantly expensive, because it was specific to
anything that
salaries.
has student data in it or employee data in it, we have to redact the information. We can give you, we can provide the general information, but it can't be specific. So we were spending a lot of money on the redactions.
Everybody on the board fine with that, to proceed in that manner? Okay.
I like the idea of keeping it quarterly, just so that if for some reason there was a spike, we're not waiting a year to find out that there was a spike and why there was a spike. I like that, the idea of quarterly. It's just
Or what
my
we're
opinion.
saying, I think, Darrell, I respect what you're saying. I think the only thing we said, if there is a spike or anything that's over a certain threshold amount, we would bring that forward at that point.
And since we really can't foresee what the amounts would be, maybe it's a percentage if we see more than a 10% increase or something, so that anything that is substantive in comparison to the trend that we're currently at, which is basically almost zero, it would trigger a more frequent update.
I guess if there was a very specific threshold, 10%, or more.
Okay.
Or we just do it twice a year too, and then, I mean, this is the longest we've ever talked about it. And like normally it's like 20 seconds.
And to the committee, it is no extra work for me. It is
Right.
done anyhow.
And, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm okay with what Director Christie just stated too. Do it twice a year, and let's just see what it does over time and what tailor accordingly. Perfect, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, now we do have some property items for Mr. Burster. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the 25-26 Capital Reserve Project bid awards.
Good evening. So the first project on the 25-26 Capital Reserve Project Awards is Project G144, which is the district-wide concrete sidewalk and curbing replacement. I am asking to award to Unitex Asphalt in the amount of $90,148. Now, for this particular project, the original project budget was only $75,000. I'm asking to utilize $15,000 of the savings from the painting project, $15,148 specifically, which was project G190 at East this year, which we had some money left over from to bridge that gap. The concrete work that we've identified definitely needs to be done. So I'd like the opportunity to move that money and complete all of that work. The next project is G193, which is a portion of the roof at Penwood. I'm requesting that we award to Garvey Rourke in the amount of $73,312. The original project budget for that project was $81,200. The next project is project G193, which is a portion of the roof at Ruston High School. So there's actually two parts of this. The first portion of this, I'm asking for an award of $7,887.
Okay, you good.
To Larson Lighting Protection. That portion of it is the lightning suppressors that are on the roof, so they're basically lighting rods. The second portion of that, the same Ruston roof area, I'm asking for an award to Center Roofing and Coating in the amount of $124,500. The original project budget for the roof in general at Ruston was $163,925, and I'm asking for a total award amount of $132,387 between both vendors.
Any questions for Mr. Burster on any of those four items? Okay. Seeing none, looking for a motion for the Property Finance Committee as follows. Approval of the 25-26 Capital Reserve Project Awards for the four projects stated by Mr. Burster. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. All right, we're good there for nothing, Justin. And then continuing on, Mr. Burster, Capital Project Bid Awards.
Capital project bid awards for this year. The first project is East Bradford Elementary School's paving replacement. Asking for an award in the amount of $147,110 with the original project budget of $150,149 to T. Schaefer Construction. The second project is again like the Ruston roof was that we had just previously discussed. Project C186 is for parts of the east roof. Again, asking to award in the amount of $13,157 to Larson Lighting Protection for the lightning suppression system that would be added to the roof. And the additional portion of that roof award going to U.S. Roofing Corporation in the amount of $589,334. Total project original budget was $679,750. Next portion again, a roofing project, project CO87, with the first portion for Fugate Middle School. First portion going to Larson Lighting Protection in the amount of $12,722. And the actual roofing portion of the project going to U.S. Roofing Corporation in the amount of $310,106. And the original project budget for that project was $345,950.
Thank you, Mr. Burster. Anybody have any comments or questions on the five capital project awards?
I don't have a question necessarily on these five, but I do have just a general question. So for example, last week, I mean it was earlier this week, where we had the significant flooding, did we have any facilities that require future repair as a result of that type of flooding or other damages that could have happened?
Sure, so that's a great question. With the amount of facilities that we have, we're always in need of various repairs, but there's no repairs specifically related to that flooding specifically. The amount of rain that we received in a very, very short window of time did leave us in a unpleasant situation in a few of our buildings and quite honestly on the grounds of a few of our properties as well. But nothing specific related to that flooding.
Okay. Just because as we all experience with our weather patterns getting a bit more chaotic and less predictable in all seasons, just anticipate that we'll always need to have some go-to in the event that we have more catastrophic damage done than we would have historically had.
Absolutely.
And Wayne, holistically, the facility department has those contingency plans in place to handle those type of expenses that pop up, unplanned activities, right?
We do. So every year when we go through the general fund projects, the Fund 27 projects, if you will, we do allocate a certain portion of money every year for emergencies. So that those monies would be used in the event of an actual emergency that required immediate attention in that way. Luckily, with this particular storm, it was more or less a cleanup effort more than anything else.
Thanks.
Just a follow-up to Jules' question. So I have to imagine with the rate of rain and even what I experience in my own house, that these don't tend to be roof leaking issues. I think especially when we're looking at the Henderson situation, you're talking about an area with a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt. So there's a lot of impervious surface, right? Which means there's just not drainage and, you know what I mean, that it overwhelms the structures. That had to be true across the borough. Are there any conversations, or is it worth engaging the borough in a conversation? Because I know that there were many areas of flooding, including the area, I guess, to the south of Henderson near the McDonald's, where we should be having a conversation that goes beyond even just our building structures, right? Because we can't be sandbagging every time there's a large storm like this, right? This isn't hurricane preparedness, but in some ways it's similar conditions where we're seeing a significant amount of flash flooding, especially in the borough or other similar areas in our district.
Sure, so I can say that from a land development standpoint, and this is not unique to the school district, but just as a general statement, that the planning for stormwater has certainly changed significantly over the last 50 years. It continues to evolve over time. So I will say that when we do land development planning within the school district, we always try to exceed the expectations, the minimum expectations. Typically, people are building towards what we call a 25-year storm. So there's a 10-year storm, a 25-year storm, 100-year storm. However, we've seen 300 or 400-year storms in the last 10 years, right? So there is certainly some thought that needs to go into how we handle stormwater and groundwater for sure. Some of that's a much bigger conversation than obviously any of us can do anything about. And then obviously when we look at a campus such as Henderson, the amount of impervious coverage that's in the greater region around it is certainly well beyond our control. But I do think that as we look to do further projects in the future in that area, that we are going to need to consider extending beyond what the minimum scope of capture would be, for sure.
And I'll just add one thing to that, Director Walmsley. I know there was a state grant granted to West Goshen for that area between Parkway Cleaners and McDonald's to make it, I don't think it's solvable, so it's not a problem.
We haven't done it yet, though.
Yeah, right, it was just, that was it. No, yeah, it was, I think just ordered in maybe the past, this year, this calendar year. But I do have one more question. I know, obviously the storm exacerbated some already existing problems. I think I did see some images from Henderson that were the roof. Is there like a plan, or maybe we can talk about this next month too, but like, I know we have a remodel in 3 years or something, so I don't know, but like, I just am curious, that's a long time still, I think, for some of those classrooms. I'm just wondering, is there something planned before that to maybe alleviate? We don't have to talk about it now, but I'd be curious maybe in the coming months to talk about it, so that's all.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Talk about it later, it's fine with me. Some of the things that, there's only so much you can do with a flat roof, right?
Yeah.
So, unlike your home that has a sloped roof typically and pushes the water off to the side, and even in those situations you have seen the gutters were overflowing and filling the ground up with water, right? So, unlike that, in most commercial buildings such as schools, you have a flat roof system and a roof drain system, right? So there are what we refer to as sumps. Basically, it's slopes on the roof that take the water to a specific area, and then that water then carries it through the building and off into the stormwater management. When you receive the amount of water that we received in a matter of a 45-minute window or an hour window that we did before, those sumps become overwhelmed and you end up with water going in places that it should not, right? So if you have 8 inches of standing water on the top of any flat roof system, you are likely pushing water beyond the flash points on the sides of the building. It's not really the roof so much as the flashing or even the HVAC equipment where fresh air intake and all of that comes into play. So there's a whole lot of variables that go into a roofing system that are not even the roof, right? And as we look at those things, as we're building them out, all of that is considered. But there's only so much planning you can actually do. So I would say that, while there certainly were some leak issues at Henderson and other schools for that matter, this last storm, I don't know that any of them could have been addressed in an immediate way, in advance, right? There are a few other issues at Henderson specifically that we are looking to address this summer as well. So projects that are already in place and underway. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and like I said, I know it was an insane amount of rain in like an hour. But from what I understand, it's not just this storm. When there's snow on the roof or even lighter storms, there is consistently. So I was just curious. And I get it, yeah, it's hard, but, anything to alleviate over the next couple of years would be helpful, so, thanks.
Okay. All right, so approval is for these 5 capital project awards as stated by Mr. Verster. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. All right, one more item that we have, approval of the East Bradford construction agreement.
So this is actually a resolution for a construction agreement, which is ultimately a plate account or an escrow account, if you will, an agreement with East Bradford Township as it relates to Hillsdale Elementary School. We in essence escrow the set amount of money that they've identified, which in this particular instance is $1.27 million, and hold that money as, in essence, insurance for us completing specific parts of the project, which are identified in the backup information attached.
Then Mr. Verster just explained they pay that back based on when you comply with those phases, right?
Correct.
To get the full amount at the end once the project's commenced.
They release the money, they don't actually give it back. We actually,
Yeah. Oh, that's right, because it's in the escrow account.
Correct.
Yes, thank you, John.
So for the board's knowledge, that escrow account remains in the district's name, but it is in the district's assets, but it has West Wayland Township attached to it, which means I can't spend the money until West Wayland releases this agreement. But West Wayland does not have this money. This is sitting in district investments.
for the record, East Bradford.
I'm sorry, East Bradford. I apologize. East Bradford. Thank you, Mr. Scully, for clarifying that. So again, this is for approval. This is approval for this escrow amount of the 1.271 million. So basically for approval to the board. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, we're good for nothing on there. And then our next Property and Finance Committee meeting will be held on Monday, June 16th. And that concludes our meeting for tonight. For anybody